Welcome back to the program. Mr. Michael Luagbemi joins us on the program. We want to talk about the issue of CNG. He's the program director and chief executive of Presidential CNG Initiative. You've heard about this a long time ago, and now the man who needs to give us all the answers is right here. Mr. Luagbemi, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
So let's begin with the natural question, I guess, that Nigerians are asking. How far with the CNG initiative? What stage are we? What is going on? When are we supposed to see things rolling out?
Thanks once again for having me, and good morning to your listeners and viewers. 6 months ago, the president announced the formation of the Presidential CNG Initiative with Dr. Zaka Didiji as the chairman of the steering committee, and of course the empowerment of our management team led by myself. And our promise was very straightforward, to implement the vision of the president for alternative vehicle by ensuring the rollout and adoption of alternative energy to power the transportation sector, specifically natural gas and EVs. And also to then incentivize this adoption by rolling out various programs and helping to distribute the various assets, including conversion kits and CNG tricycles and buses that will be acquired by the Federal Ministry of Finance upon their arrival. In addition to these, to ensure that financial incentives and funding to develop CNG infrastructure across the country and EV infrastructure across the country is made available over a long term, while also ensuring the regulatory framework for CNG adoption is made available for the country in order for businesses to flourish under a predictable regulatory environment. We've been hard at work since the month of November. We've not just been engaged with the sector and developing a plan for energy transition in the transport sector, but right out of the bat in the month of December, we rolled out some critical incentives that were approved by Mr. President, including VAT and import duty waiver for the sector that had been welcomed by a number of investors. We also rolled out the partnership with the private sector that have led to attracting over $50 million worth of investments just since the last 4 months. That is now currently developing at least over 80 CNG sites, including a couple that were launched last weekend actually in Ibadan, with one of our major partners, that's the Bovas company and Limited. And this is just one of many realizations of the promises of Mr. President. We are beginning to see the development of conversion centers across Nigeria. With less than 7 of them at inception just 6 months ago, we have over 40 of them currently, and continue to grow. We have more than 100 pending applications with NMPDRA for installation and development of CNG refueling stations. A number of CNG motor stations have been developed also. NIPCO has 3 and a number of partners, including outcome of a meeting that we had just earlier this week with gas suppliers and midstream players. A number of them are developing these motor stations as well as daughter stations to distribute CNG across the country. These are one of many outcomes of the work that we've been doing in the last months. We've also rolled out 80 critical regulations, working with our partners at Standard Organization of Nigeria to enable auto vehicle conversions that will allow vehicles to run on both PMS and CNG upon conversion, but ensure that these conversions are done safely, reliably, and that vehicles can now utilize a much cheaper option of running on CNG. These programs are ongoing, and we expect in the next couple of months, our partners at the Federal Ministry of Finance will begin to deliver the critical assets I mentioned. Over 20,000 conversion kits that were distributed through our over 20 affiliate partners across the country, located in about 18 states, more than 5,500 tricycles and CNG buses that will also be distributed through to private sector transport operators and labor union affiliated operators that will enable us to have these vehicles running across the country. Again, a journey of 1,000 miles started with the first step, but I think we're in the right direction. We are galvanizing critical stakeholders, including even the academia. We're working with over 10 universities to roll out a campus equivalent of this program once we receive these assets from the Ministry of Finance. We are working very closely with unions, including URTW, URTN, and NATO, to ensure that the road transport unions and operators are tuned to the requirements of the sector and open to converting the vehicles to run on natural gas. Nigeria is a gas country. We're blessed with gas. There's no reason why we continue to depend solely on PMS and diesel. The reality is that countries like Japan, since 1984, had converted their commercial fleet to gas. And this gas was sourced from Nigeria. Then they use that gas to manufacture vehicles made with PMS and diesel and then turn around to export that to Nigeria. So it's about time Nigeria starts using our natural resources as a competitive advantage, and that's what we're here to do, to enable.
Quite some ground that the presidential initiative has covered there. But I was also hoping that you would touch on progress on that announcement by Mr. President nearly 9 months ago now, I believe, at the time of the setting up of the initiative, that there would be purchase of CNG-powered buses, particularly after the removal of fuel subsidy, and for which the Senate is, as a matter of fact, investigating, saying that the 100 billion naira was approved without, I believe, outside the budget. Also, what's the update on the panel's inquiry into the release of these funds? According to the Senate, it's saying that there is a plan to blackmail the panel's inquiry into the project. So what's the update on the Senate's investigation into the release of these funds, and how far with the purchase of CNG-powered buses by the initiative?
Yeah, I don't, there's no, for us at the presidential initiative, we are utilizing the 100 billion naira assigned for this program under the 500 billion naira palliative program that was approved by the National Assembly. So there's no question in my mind that that 500 billion appropriation, 100 billion of which was approved for CNG and is being implemented by the acquisition of the assets, as I've said, is being implemented by the Federal Ministry of Finance. The initiative side of the work, which is our work, is to utilize those assets that have been acquired. And we're still waiting for the acquired assets. Of course, you know the procurement law. The Federal Ministry of Finance will comply with the law of the land. And so they are complying, but it takes time. And it takes time for things to be acquired and for them to arrive. So I do not know, I do not understand why anyone will say that the 100 billion naira was suddenly coming from somewhere that was not envisaged. It's just like the 200 billion you mentioned, which is a component of in your last spiel, which is a component of the palliative, and that one was devoted to SMEs. I mean, it's being managed by the Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. The 100 billion component for CNG is being managed primarily by the Federal Ministry of Finance, and we are expecting those assets. Typically, procurement takes between 6 to 9 months, and I believe we should be expecting the first set of assets in the next 30 to 60 days. And then our side of the work, which is we are the end user, will be to then figure out how to distribute those assets, finance those assets, and make sure those assets get into the hands of those that will use it. But the assets by themselves do not work. You need infrastructure. So the work we've been doing in the last 6 months is to make sure that those infrastructure are on ground. And those infrastructure are not going to be built with government money. They'll be built with the private sector investment. And that requires you to ensure you have regulation in place. That requires you to ensure that you encourage the private sector to bring their funds in place. That involves us to actually start stimulating demand organically, so that it's not just dependent. Maximum government can enable maybe 30,000 natural gas vehicle with an investment of 100 billion naira, if we look at it critically. But 30,000 natural gas vehicle is not enough to create the sector. You need another 250, 300,000. And the private sector needs to come into and do that investment. So our work as an initiative in the last 6 months has been to create the enabling environment for the private sector to participate. The 100 billion naira is only down payments by the federal government towards the future that is green, that is gas, that is EV. And that, of course, that fund is being utilized for specific purposes. Acquisition of CNG buses just being one of them. Acquisition of CNG tricycles for the bottom of the pyramid being another. Acquisition of CNG converted kits that will allow you to convert your existing PMS vehicles to natural gas hybrid is also another component of that program. And that's what constitutes the 100 billion naira. And so that is being done, like I said, and we're expecting to receive those assets. It is not being done by us. It is being done by the Federal Ministry of Finance as appropriated by the National Assembly. So the committee might be looking at the wrong place, I think.
So you're saying that the purchase of the buses is not being handled by the presidential initiative on CNG, but by the Ministry of Finance?
Absolutely. That is being done under appropriation by the Ministry of Finance. The presidential CNG initiative is an initiative out of the Office of the President, does not undertake a procurement of assets.
But can you tell us what component of that fund will cover the purchase of the CNG buses and the CNG-powered tricycles? How much of the 100 billion naira?
Oh, you have to speak to the Ministry of Finance for details. That's within their own purview. But I do believe that we're expecting at least at the first phase of the program about 500 buses and about 5,000 tricycles.
Just before we exit this matter, how true is it that there are quite a number of buses that are waiting importation to Nigeria in Germany, about 65 of them, and it is, some administrative issues about bringing them into the country that is delaying the importation of those buses into Nigeria?
I'm not aware of that, and I don't think it's part of this program. And let's put this in very clear context. I know the Ministry of Finance strategy for the acquisition of buses to make sure that those buses are actually assembled in Nigeria. That includes tricycles, so I don't think they will be subject to this kind of delays you're talking about. And 65 buses in the next of what we're talking about, as a country that has 5 million, 6 million commercial vehicles, is a drop. I don't think the emphasis of our program should be acquisition of buses, no. The emphasis of this program is how do we move Nigeria to have 1 million natural gas vehicles in the next 4 years. And you can only do that by mass conversion. So we'll be rolling out a conversion incentive program in the next 60 days that will enable Nigerians to convert the vehicles to run on both PMS and CNG. Acquiring a few buses and distributing it for the purpose of palliative is just that. It's not a core component of this program. The core component of this program is mass conversions, and that's what we're focused on.
But a lot of Nigerians will remember how the president addressed the nation July 31st last year, and he spoke about how we're going to be rolling out CNG buses as a solution to ease the burdens created by the removal of fuel subsidies. And that's why we're having this conversation, because CNG is that alternative, or at least provides an alternative which has been said to be cheaper and all, such that people don't have to rely heavily on PMS. So you can imagine why Nigerians are, I wouldn't say impatient, they just expect what was promised. July 31st last year, it's almost a year. I remember that the president spoke about making provision to invest 100 billion naira between July and March this year, July last year and March this year. For a lot of people, as I've said, that's a long time already, and they expect to see things moving really fast in that sector. But let's step back a bit. Some work is being done. I understand that the kits are being expected and will be deployed. But one question still is in the air, and I want you to address that quickly this morning. They say charity begins at home. How much of an uptake do we have within government itself? I've seen private people convert their vehicles, even if we don't have as much, support, the stations and the rest. But in government, the presidential fleet, the fleet for other government officials, the vehicles for ministers and the rest. If we want to cut costs, that's a brilliant way. So how much uptake do we have already?
Yeah, brilliant question. Again, this is part of the work. Again, in a context of where we have not rolled out infrastructure, where there was no regulation, this was where we were 6 months ago, where there was no sufficient incentives in terms of either the vehicles being available or the cylinders or the kits in the country, then there was paucity of adoption. But what we've done in the last 6 months is to enable a much more rapid adoption, and that includes adoption by government institutions. For example, in the last month, we partnered with the Nigerian Army. We've trained about 42 Army technicians that is going to undertake the conversion of the Nigerian Army fleet. The Nigerian Army is the biggest user of diesel and PMS in the country, with operations in 36 states of the Federation. And that's a significant part of Nigeria's budget. As you can imagine, Nigeria's defense budget is, I think it's about 18 to 25% of the budget. So that's the biggest component chunk of Nigeria's government expenditure. So if you're talking about charity beginning at home, we're leading with the Nigerian Army and various other government institutions, the Navy, the Air Force, FRS, various, including government offices and ministries, are beginning to indicate willingness to partner with us.
Pardon me, Mr.
But our kickoff of the program with the Army in the last
Pardon
month
me, if I could just quickly put this in, forgive me. So that's more like charity beginning on the war front, not at home. You talk about military, and it's brilliant to see.
Well,
we were there. When I mean at home, I mean in government, government officials, president, and I'm being particular here because that would set a tone for other Nigerians that, oh, if the president's fleet has CNG vehicles, if we have the minister's cars with CNG, absolutely, this is something to do.
The Nigerian Army is part and parcel of Nigerian government. The president is the commander-in-chief. That's the second title. So I do not understand this is being starting at the war front. No, the Nigerian Army is part and parcel of government. We intend, and I'm very sure, the president's team, including myself, we will ensure that vehicles that we use, because it just makes sense. It doesn't make sense for me to be using petrol at 630, 640 naira when I can buy CNG at less than 250 naira. And the car will run cheaper, run cleaner, and run safer and more reliable. As soon as those kits are made available, again, the reality today is that in the entire country, we have less than, and we've done a census of this in the last 60 days, we have less than 400, 500 kits available in Nigeria today, right now. So what we need to do first and foremost is to make those kits available. And that's what we are trying to ensure happens in the next 60 days. And once that becomes available, government institutions, a lot of them have already raised up their hands to say they want to participate in this. The Nigerian Army just being one of them. But for us, it makes sense that we start that engagement from the most difficult potential operational rollout, in this case, the Nigerian Army, to see how, number one, to ensure that their technicians are trained. They have workshops across the country. They are the biggest user. So if we have savings from the Nigerian Army front, then we have savings for the entire government. So I don't agree with you that the Nigerian Army is not home or the war front. The Nigerian Army is home. The Nigerian Army is working with Nigerians in 36 states of the Federation. So it's home. So we feel very comfortable and very happy. We've been happy with the pilots that we've done with them. We trained 42 technicians in Lagos and in Abuja in the last 2 weeks. They graduated last Friday. Kudos to them. They are ready to begin to implement conversions as soon as those conversion kits are made available. We expect over 20,000 conversion kits in country before the end of July, and we'll begin that rollout. And I can promise you that government institutions, including my own vehicle, is going to be running on CNG.
It's good to hear, Mr. Oluwagbemi, on this particular one. Maybe piggyback on what my colleague was talking about. We've seen that government at different times will say patronize Nigerian-made products and all of that. Until today, we don't see our presidential fleet or most of the governors and top government officials driving in any of our local vehicles that are manufactured here. Just can literally count at the tip of our fingers. That's why we're poking and asking that question. Now that the CNG is here, hopefully it's going to roll out pretty soon. Lead by example so that it builds confidence in the mind of the people. It's not every time we see the army. They are not supposed to be seen all the time. But these politicians and the leaders of our country, we see them all the time. So if I see the president's fleet or the governor's fleet vehicles having all of this, it builds confidence. So that's exactly what we're going to be looking out for it. And we'll keep asking that question until we see it done, including your own vehicle, since you're the leader. But moving on, let's also say that how far-reaching will this be? Because the numbers we're looking at is a great idea in the next 4 years, but the pressure that people are feeling is right now. Is there a way to expedite things to make sure that it actually moves the needle?
Okay, I'll take you up on the first point. The first 2 buses that we deployed in right the second week after the deployment of the CNG, of the announcement of the CNG program, were deployed at the State House for State House employees. So I think we've already demonstrated sufficient faith in CNG by doing that. And I think that speaks to the fact. That's the only 2 buses so far deployed by this program. And they were all deployed at the State House, Abuja, used by State House staff, by State House employees to convey themselves from work to home every day. So that's very important to us. So I need to put that out there so we start sending a message that we believe that this is the right thing to do. And those of us in the State House are using CNG buses. I hope that clears the air. Now to the second point, how do you accelerate things? We accelerate things in three ways. One, the President has been very gracious to approve the expediting of the procurement of those critical kits as well as platforms, CNG platforms, by the Federal Minister of Finance on emergency procurement. Otherwise, we probably will not be expecting these items until maybe early next year. Unfortunately, the current procurement law that we run is very inefficient, and typically you don't get to procurement until 9 to 12 months into the program. But because of the approval of Mr. President, we're expecting some of these just 6 to 7 months into the program. So I think that's one thing we need to keep doing, at least for the next 4 years, to ensure that we can get these items on time. Secondly, we can also expedite matters by engaging the private sector. Like I said, the government by itself alone cannot potentially buy all the conversion kits, like the 1 million conversion kits that Nigerians need to convert 1 million vehicles that will save us $2 billion yearly in the next 4 years. We need the private sector to come in. And what we needed to do was to ensure that we have a very clear regulatory framework so that the private sector can invest. Not just framework for conversion, but framework for refueling, framework for CNG processing, framework for gas sourcing and supply. All of these, all the way from end to end of the value chain, from nozzle to pump, as we say, we needed to develop a regulatory framework that will enable investment. And that includes incentive programs like the duty waiver and the exemptions that Mr. President has now given. This is very critical to expedite the adoption of CNG across the country. Last but not the least is that we also require injection of development funding, especially from the point of view of the infrastructure. We need infrastructure for CNG distribution in the country. We need virtual pipelines, we need trucks, we need refueling stations, about 3,000 of them. We need mini LNGs across the 36 states of the Federation. We need critical investments, funding for pipelines, the AKK pipeline to land in Kano, distribution pipeline to go to the northeast and northwest and across the country, to land critical gas across the country that allows processing stations, CNG mother stations to then be developed. These critical development and infrastructure funding is also required. And I think, as you see with a renewed Hope Infrastructure Fund, that will then be able to come into the CNG program, because transportation is one of the critical sectors that the RHIF is supposed to invest in. So you can see end to end that the Mr. President is committed, is passionate about Nigeria's transition to CNG. He's passionate about Nigeria's transition of the transportation sector to cheaper, safer, more reliable energy. And that is why he's doing all the things he's doing, right from the point of view of expediting procurement of the catalyst items, asset I call them, because really those are just a very small drop in the ocean that is required. But also ensuring and enabling the necessary regulation that allows the private sector to come in to do the quantum investment that is necessary to move us forward, and also enabling infrastructure investment that we allow. Indeed, Mr.
Oluwagbemi, it's an ambitious program that, it's a giving that you require the engagement of the private sector. And I see that there's been some activity in that regard in the last few days. And that is why we hope that Nigeria can follow the example of China by expanding local capacity and ensuring that even if we do not have a manufacturing component of electric vehicles or CNG-powered vehicles, at least there is an assembly component. We hope that, that assembling component can be engaged to also intervene or make available the CNG buses. But conversion is certainly not cheap. According to reports, Nigerians need about 300 to 600,000 naira to convert their vehicles from PMS to CNG. And there's a 130 billion naira provision, if I'm not mistaken, for that. Is there a loan component out of this budget to enable Nigerians at the lower rung of the ladder to be able to convert their vehicles?
Yeah, so speaking about industrial capacity, let me treat the first part of the question. We recognize that going forward, we cannot continue to depend on importation. We can't go from importing petrol and diesel and PMS to importing kits, cylinders, and the necessary components for vehicle conversion to create the natural gas vehicle industry in Nigeria. So we're already working with our partners at the Nigerian Midstream Downstream Gas Infrastructure Fund to develop an industrial park that will have manufacturers of these critical components do their manufacturing in Nigeria. And we hope that this will be kicked off sometime before the end of the year. But the conversations have already started. The private sector partners are being mobilized. Investment are being mobilized for this purpose. And we know that this is a critical component of the work. We hope eventually that already under the first phase of the implementation of the palliative by the Ministry of Finance, they had prioritized Nigerian manufacturers in terms of assembly of CNG vehicles, tricycles, and the rest of them. But of course, we also want to extend that beyond those assets to conversion, because at the end of the day, like I said, this program really scales when you convert a large number of existing vehicles. We already have over 12 million vehicles running in Nigeria, and 5 million of those are commercial vehicles. We want to see a substantial number of those running on CNG. We do not need to go and buy new CNG vehicles, as the case may be, just less than $600, about 500, 300, or 400,000 naira. Most of these vehicles will conveniently run on a fuel that is 40–50% cheaper than PMS and diesel. So that's what we want to do at scale. And that requires us to manufacture the cylinders, for example, which are very critical in Nigeria, to manufacture the conversion kits, to manufacture the computer module that drives the injection of CNG into the vehicle combustion system, side-by-side PMS. So all of those things can be manufactured in Nigeria. So we believe that Nigeria can awaken our manufacturing capacity. And we're working with the Ministry of Steel, we're working with the Ministry of Transportation, and we spoke to this 3 weeks ago when we launched the Army program. And that plan is on course, and I believe that you'll be seeing more of this, and as we roll out our details and plans for local manufacturing for the CNG program. That said,
Mr. Micah, we just have 30 seconds. If you could just land on your thoughts in 30 seconds. We're totally out of time.
All right. The second component of that question has just to do with the overall adoption of CNG itself and expediting it and all of whatnot. I think ultimately it will depend on you and I. It will depend on Nigerians believing that we should use our own natural resource to actually develop this country. And that requires our own commitment, either in terms of our naira and our kobo. But the federal government will help. The conversion incentive program will be rolled out in the next 60 days that will enable critical sectors of the economy to access this conversion, for example, at a discounted price. This includes mass transit sector, rideshare owners, institutions, governments, as you already mentioned. And slowly but surely, as we get additional appropriation, additional funding available, we can expand it to general public.
I know that you have a lot to say about this, and we're curiously waiting for it. We have enough gas reserve in the country from the publication by the Commission. So we must thank you for coming on the program, Mr. Michael Luagbemi, Program Director, Chief Executive of Presidential CNG Initiative. We're looking forward to this as soon as possible. Thank you for coming.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We'll come back after this break. We're shifting gears. The president actually declared April the 7th National Police Day. What does that mean for the police force and for all of us who they serve? We'll explain all of that. The guests will join us to tell us what it is. Join us again.